Hello and welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending August 13th, 2016. Here, thanks to our brainwashed thralls whom we have bewitched with the tears of virgin Neko girls, we have compiled a collection of funny, interesting, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the spoils of their hard work. Let us begin with Polecat cast number 74, where we look at the fan response to Suicide Squad reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, Listen and Believe Gone Wild, and we find out that stunt women are victims of sexism even though they don't think they're victims of sexism.
The movie critics versus John Q. Public. With the release of Warner Brothers' newest film in the DCCU, Suicide Squad, we once again find ourselves in a situation where the movie watchers and the movie critics are very divided. This trend has existed for as long as there have been critics, but recently the internet has grown much louder. When the reviews for Suicide Squad came out, it appeared the film would be poor. At present, it's sitting at 26%, while viewers gave it a score of 72%. There was such a rage at reviewers that a petition to shut down Rotten Tomatoes, even though it was partially owned by Warner Brothers, and RT is nothing more than a site that compiles reviews and has no bearing on what the results would be. But with all controversy surrounding these differences of opinion on the part of the reviewers and consumers is the response from YouTube personalities. Popular YouTube reviewers like Schmoes Know, What the Flick, John Campea, Channel Awesome, Chris Stuckman, and Mark Kermode have insulted and criticized directors, writers, producers, devs, and their listeners. But when they are criticized, they become victims of online abuse and get teary-eyed on videos while announcing from their ivory towers that there is a problem with fandoms or something of the like. Fandoms can get messy for sure, but I propose this. Do we really need critics to validate our taste? Do we need critics?
So, ladies and gentlemen, with Hollywood blockbusters like Suicide Squad that just came out this past week, there's heart-stopping action. And with heart-stopping action, there are stuntmen. Where there are stuntmen, there are bruises, broken bones, and, God forbid, impalements. Unlike other statistics that involve harm inflicted on one's person, there are no immediate statistics available in regards to how many injuries and what types of injuries stuntmen suffer from. As action-adventure movies continue to get bigger and flashier, it might be useful to start creating these statistics so that the people who help create these unique chills and thrills can be protected, right? It's a large discussion, one that some people might believe needs, you guessed it, a gendered focus. But it's not the discussion the Honey Badgers wish to have. Rather, it's our good old friends at The Guardian. The Guardian is drawing attention to sexism bred from market forces, as Brian put it in Skype chat earlier, even though they would like you to believe it is born from pure prejudice. Unlike some stuntmen, stunt women are often dressed in, quote, clothes as flimsy as paper doilies and are forced to meet Hollywood's demands for ever-shrinking waistlines without losing the muscles they depend on for work. Unlike their male counterparts, stunt women resort to using things like crash pads made from gel to protect themselves, the same that figure skaters use, right? And thankfully, most of the stunts are not life-threatening, according to Charlize Theron's main stunt double, Dana Grant, who she's worked with on films like Mad Max, Fury Road most recently. She just notes that it hurts a lot more. This is interesting because she also notes an instance where she got impaled by a dagger through her cheek and nasal cavities after she slipped on a hill wearing, as she put, very feminine shoes. Grant, along with the other stunt women interviewed in this article, take on a very healthy, respectable attitude towards their job. Quote, it's just what needs to be done for the film, according to Grant. They even present a sense of camaraderie with their male peers, noting that no matter how padded they may be, there's likely going to be some sharp object that finds an unpadded portion of the body. Now, putting aside the contrasting tenor of both the Guardian's opinions and those of the stunt women, it raises an interesting question. Are stunt women more at risk because Hollywood places these unrealistic beauty standards on its subjects, or are there more nuances here that the Guardian is missing?
A lot of times, people that are involved in geek culture, they're not just big movie fans. They also play video games, and they also like to read comic books or whatever, watch TV. So a lot of this stuff has a lot of crossover. And I'm thinking, this is one of the reasons why I thought this was an interesting story, is that I wonder if that rift isn't growing more so, and the fact that, you combine that with another important factor is that people who are big fans of DC Comics, they really, really wanted this movie to be a success. They wanted to leave it so much that when the reviews came out and they were negative, they got angry. And at the reviewers, they thought there must be a conspiracy. Which is what they did. They said, oh, you guys, there's a bias. The people are bought and paid for by, I don't know, some other company or whatever. They seriously did, even though, again, not only does it not make sense because, you know, Warner Brothers owns part of the stock, and Rotten Tomatoes has absolutely, they don't do anything but put the reviews together. And on top of that, if you look at Rotten Tomatoes compiled reviews for other Warner Brothers films like the Dark Knight trilogy and the old Batman movies, you'll see that those are really good reviews. So, you know, some of them I think are at almost 100%, like the Dark Knight, for example. A critic that is okay with criticizing everybody else should also be ready to criticize themselves. So, you know, there is that. Now, that doesn't mean you have to take somebody's insults and vitriol to heart, but on the internet, this is something that you're just going to have to deal with. And you also have to understand that everybody on the internet is an individual, so those people do not reflect anything except their own opinions, just as you as a critic also are only reflecting of your opinions. To the fans, I would say this. If someone reviews a film in the way that you don't want, then you don't have to listen to them.
There's
you can go
hundreds.
See it yourself. Yeah, just go see it yourself and see if it's something that you want.
It's kind of like, you know, fucking toughen up.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hate saying that, but with the internet, you have to understand that there is a certain degree of you gotta fucking just not give a fuck. You really have to be able to. You have to you have to tune that shit out. You just have to say, I'm not gonna fucking read the comments section. And if I do, like you were saying, those comments are not emblematic of everybody. That people are speaking as individuals. They're not speaking for the fucking entire geek culture or whatever culture you're, you know, particularly talking about at that moment. When you look at people on YouTube and you measure them up against people like Richard Roper and people of that caliber who actually have worked for decades and actually, you know, have gone to school for these things and taken journalism classes and learned the correct way to do these things, there's a very big disparity there because people like Roper understand that he has to separate himself from his feelings, his personal feelings, and from, you know, and from what he's reviewing. It's kind of like being a defense lawyer. You may know that the person is guilty and they're doing something fucked up, but your job is to be impartial and try and give them the best defense you can. You know, maybe it's not the best analogy, but I think it's somewhat apt to this kind of situation. It's like we're talking about people who are just people who found audiences on the internet. They weren't necessarily professionals. This is just something they were doing as in a hobbyist capacity or a citizen journalist kind of capacity. So, and I hate to be like, you know, these aren't legitimate voices because they're allowed their opinions, and more power to them for sharing them and for finding their audiences and for cultivating these kind of things and becoming popular. That's not easy, but take into account who these people are, not to dismiss them, but to just understand kind of where they're at, and you know, so that's something to consider and think about.
Yeah.
By the way, and this is just something to ponder, we don't have to discuss it, but does it seem like just a coincidence that intersectionality came along at a time when, as a community, as a country, or as a world, really, we were starting to get along better? We're starting to eliminate a lot of the division between races and religions and everything, and then boom, intersectionality comes along and it's all back.
It's like a high school newspaper, except it was written by the fucking cheerleaders. It's a story about a casual sexual relationship. That's it. It's a story because he was accused of rape. Even though all the way through this news article is describing a consensual relationship, but one in which the man left after the sex. It's still not illegal, folks. Still not illegal. In the headline. Look at the fucking headline. Come straight in with rugby star accused of rape. Left girl feeling she had been bucked and ditched. Caught his.
Yes.
You see what I mean? Imagine the headline. Man accused of murder. Left girl saying he almost killed me. Carry on reading it. It's consistently hilarious.
Yeah.
A rising rugby star accused of raping a student he met on Tinder has admitted making an excuse and leaving her home just minutes after their sexual encounter. He admitted making an excuse. Making an excuse is not a crime, you mental case.
Whenever I get raped, I definitely message somebody to bitch that the rapist left too soon afterwards. I mean, because, you know, you want them to stick around after they have just traumatized the shit out of you. But it goes entirely against listen and believe. Because you're not listening and you're not believing. If a woman tells you, I had consensual sex, and then you accuse the guy of rape because she admits to being upset about a detail involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is essentially, here we go, Tony8353 has the perfect term for it, clusterfuck. You know, this is a clusterfuck. This is a mess. It's just an absolute fucking mess. It's not he said, she said. It's they did and somebody else said. You know, what the fuck is that? What right does a third party have to come in and define two people's interaction with each other to make one of them the victim of the other one when nobody was claiming to be a victim. Nobody was saying, I feel taken advantage of. Nobody was saying, I think that I didn't consent to that. I said no and they didn't stop. Nobody was saying that. That is absolutely wrong. That is a moment where you should listen and believe. If she says she consented to this, if she was involved in this, and the only thing she's upset about is he didn't stick around long enough, that is a moment when you should listen and believe her saying, I was not raped. Because that's what she basically said by saying he didn't stick around long enough. If she was raped, she'd have wanted his ass out of there as quickly as possible. And she would have texted her friend, holy shit, I've just been raped. Thank God he's gone.
The thing is, too, is that they... Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, no, Mike, go ahead.
Sort of jokingly said earlier, maybe a rapist should be forced to stay there and watch the movie with her. But when this happens in other countries, he's forced to marry her. And by the time the story makes it over here, it's, oh, a girl forced to marry a rapist. This is that story.
Yeah, he does admit that he made an excuse, saying that he had to be up early to train. You couldn't stick around. In addition, they met on Tinder.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to point out, actually.
Yeah, they met on Tinder. Now, I used to be on Tinder. Tinder it's made for hookups, mostly.
Right.
Some people do try to, like, I don't know why, but some people do try to use Tinder to actually, like, find a meaningful relationship. But in general, that is basically the booty call app. That is, you're looking for someone in the area who is down to fuck, and then you go down and you fuck them.
You know,
that's what it's for.
Here's the thing, too. This is quoting this woman. I didn't think you were just going to treat me like that, not just sleep with me and then leave. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of what Tinder is.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but you're a fucking moron, okay?
Yeah.
Plain and fucking simple. You are an idiot.
The men that usually end up in jail over stuff like this are the ones who are so broke they can't afford a lawyer, and public defenders don't do them any good. Or they're of a history where somebody can make them look like they're more likely to have committed the crime because maybe they held up a convenience store, or maybe they have been in a lot of fights and have assault charges on their record and things like that.
The only thing I want to say to that is that what The Guardian is really trying to make an argument for is that women are dressed too scantily in film. Because it's not about stunt women, because they're just wearing what the women were wearing. But what they're saying is that women should be wearing more. Because the stunt women, because they just get to wear, like a high-cut evening gown or something, of that nature, at least in this example. They can't actually, wear a bunch of padding so they can, fall down and, take hits and all that. But what they don't really seem to understand is a lot of times stunt men also don't get to wear padding because they might be shirtless or they might be in Speedos or something for any given scene. And stunt people were not getting as much work as they used to. But if you look at films from the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of stunt people getting a lot of work. Not only stunt people, but fight choreographers and dance choreographers and so on. And a lot of times those people were put in a good amount of danger. So when I look at this article, I'm thinking, it seems like they're making a mountain out of a molehill, and they're trying to gender a problem that is not a gendered problem.
The dictates of women's clothing come from women. They do not come from men. They do not come from magazines. They do not come from television and movies. They do not come from anywhere but women. Women wear what women want to wear, and we wear it to show off our assets.
Allow me to make something clear, though, just as an aside. The Guardian article is trying to make the stunt women into victims of sexism. But the stunt women themselves are not complaining. The stunt women themselves, in their interviews, are saying, this is the job that I have chosen, therefore this is what I have to do. It can be hard, and sometimes I get hurt. But the men get hurt too, and more often, they get hurt far worse. And these people are not just stunt people. They're stunt people, they're actors, they're martial artists, they're singers, they're dancers, they do the whole thing. And I think that a lot of people who do stunt work professionally, they admire that a great deal. And for The Guardian to try to take these women that take this job very seriously and trivialize it, it should be insulting to them. I hope that they saw that, and what probably happened is they were interviewed, and they thought, oh, that was nice, they wanted to talk to me about my job, and then they read it, and they're like, holy shit, they're making me out to a victim of sexism in the industry when I get paid as much as this guy, but he does riskier shit than I do. In Polecat cast number 74 3/4, we look at where the Gamergate veteran Mombot baits SJWs and exposes them as the bullies and hypocrites that they really are. And Pokemon rape. Doxing is a horrible act. Most of us can agree upon that. It's even a sentiment shared by our detractors. Well, most of them at least. A small group of aggros colluded in secret to drop dox on one of Gamergate's most beloved figureheads, the Twitter user Mombot. Mombot claims to be a mother with Japanese roots. She's been a largely helpful force, especially when it comes to helping translate Japanese games that have been censored, censored English releases. But supporting Gamergate hasn't made her popular with everyone. Those traveling in SJW circles cast blame upon her for fanning the flames of harassment and exasperating the situation, which eventually led to the firing of Allison Rapp. Deciding to see who might have it in for her, Mombot colluded with a pro-Gamergate accomplice by the handle of Rudderhouse. Together, the two engaged in an all-out mock Twitter battle against one another to make it seem as if they were bitter enemies on polar sides of Gamergate. This is actually playing out like something of a spy intrigue espionage story. I could see Mombot and Rudderhouse meeting in some seedy inn or waterfront.
Actually passing
bar.
messages underneath like park benches or something.
Once Rudderhouse's character was established, they began to craft a fake social media presence for Mombot, one that would seem to fly in the face of what she claimed she was. The trap was laid and the bait was set. Soon Rudderhouse found an eager cadre of aggros salivating at the chance to dig into the dirt and expose a pro-Gamergater as a fraud. They began connecting the dots just as planned, and eventually uncovered what Mombot and Rudderhouse had planted for them to find. Ready to hit the enemy where it hurts, they began to leak out what they thought were details of Mombot's real life, mostly focusing on what they had come to believe was her real name, Zach Miller. Mombot played along, making her tweets private, making it seem as if they had struck a nerve. Emboldened by their success, they went on the offensive, spamming Mombot with memes referencing the character Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell. A few hours into the assault, Mombot dropped the curtain and revealed the ruse, posting chat logs and the names of all those involved in the doxing group. Those most notable within the name group are Israel Izzy Galvez, an anti-abuse specialist, lol, for Amazon.com, and staff member of Zoe Quinn's Crash Override Network, Lamau. Also on the list is Pal Hofstein, a longtime opponent of Gamergate and a creative director for Ubisoft. Ooh. Responses from the SJW camp range from surprise shock to a mere shrug and a sigh. No matter how concrete the proof we have of an organized group of harassers hiding within their midst, they're still the good guys and we're still the bad guys. Anti-Gamergate kiddies thought they had doxed me last night. My condolences. I remain undoxed. But kudos to Anti-Gamergate, who played their roles amazingly in my little show. Now you might be asking yourself, then why did the Facebook account vanish and why did you go protected and delete tweets? The answer is to bait you into demonstrating that you are willing to participate in doxing when it is the right person getting doxed. Who do you think told you about these things? Who do you think is in your group DM watching you talk about this as I type? Hello to all you folks watching at home. And then she includes a photo. And they call this the Zach attack too, apparently. But guess what? Your informant, Rudderhouse, asked me to play along since last April. You got fucking outskilled. Rudderhouse.
Oh my god. I've never... okay, I know I shouldn't, but I'm really enjoying this gloating.
So Royal Holiness is saying this guy is creepy as fuck. Holy shit. F you, I work from home. I don't know who that is. This guy will send waves of dogpile at you if you fuck with him. Suddenly he locks up at Zach. Royal Holiness, it's true. He's tried it with me, but my trolling is over 9,000. Ironic. So most of them just get confused and moved on. I say we circle the wagons, get the pitchforks, light the fires. There be a witch hunt this eve. Coughs. Or, you know, we could be good people and not reveal this information. All right, so this is the last message in the DM, but it's the most meaningful, okay? Izzy Galvez says, it's weird. Usually I am against this stuff, that is doxing. But this someone, well, I think he meant to say this is someone. This is someone who gets away with all of their abuse because of their mask, the mask of anonymity. If they are unmasked and cower away for a long time, I am okay with that.
Just remember, folks, there's all kinds of rapes that aren't being investigated, terrorist acts that are, possible terrorist cells that aren't being investigated, and other kinds of real crimes that the police can't put as much manpower in because these people get their feelings hurt on Twitter. So if you see these individuals, please do not harass them.
Yeah.
Like they were just in the group. We don't know if they actually did anything related to doxing anyone. Just don't harass people. Like just do what I do. Just unravel their arguments with a few choice statements, and show them up to not be to just show them up with the via the arguments that they use. Don't insult them. Don't harass them. But of course, you realize that when you do that, they will block you. And they will say you are a harasser. But at the very least, when Twitter looks at that, they'll be like, I can't make this out to be harassment, so I can't shadow ban or otherwise ban this person from the Twitters. Because there's absolutely no ad hominems, no shit posting. Just pick out the threads that totally unravel their arguments.
The feminists took to Twitter to discuss ways that they could make Hollywood even more equal, i.e. have more women in it that are starring in everything and fewer white men, and with a hashtag feminist the movie. But it got co-opted gloriously by anti-feminists and people who are just sick of all this shit. And they just decided they would start coming up with funny titles for the feminism movie hashtag.
If you look at social justice warrior stuff and you realize that they are white people in many cases who think that minorities and lesbians and the disenfranchised are incapable of achievement without white people doing it for them, essentially, then the extreme racism makes a lot of sense. They are essentially slave owners, because that was a lot of the logic of slave owners. Black people need us to marshal them. They can't succeed without us. They can't succeed without us. That justifies all of our ownership.
None of the children were touched or injured by the men. So they're saying men, even though they said they were minors and a boy and a girl. See, it says here boy and girl.
How did
but then it says men.
Kids, a boy and a girl, become men? Like this is it, guys. This is the epicenter. This is the eye of the fucking shit tornado.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. This is the eye of the threat narrative. These two kids, a boy and a girl, suddenly became men. Suddenly. Because they did something that could possibly be seen as wrong.
Woman tells police she was raped by a Pokémon Go character after she felt an assault, and the virtual reality game detected the creature in her bedroom. So, oh my God, Pokemon in my bedroom, I'm going to be raped. The woman says the Pokemon disappeared when she jumped out of bed, but says the Pokemon Go app on her phone could still detect the same virtual character's presence in her bed. Dun, dun, dun. She woke up her husband to tell her she's married. She's an adult. She woke up her husband to tell her what had happened, who told police officers that he did not believe her and told her to see a psychiatrist. Yeah, and get the fuck out, dude. Run. Yeah. Run and don't look back.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, get out of that relationship, friend.
Russian news website Blocknot reports that the police did not believe her either, and that the woman then went on to see a psychic who was unable to help her. Maybe it's actually true.
A psychic or a psychiatrist?
A psychic.
Oh,
it says a psychic.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
She went to get a tarot reading, and it didn't help. Oh my God! Russia? What is going on over there?
Guy, who is married to her? Get out. I second Brian. Get out. I mean, because the thing is that the next allegation is going to be possibly you raping her, and the police will believe that.
Mm-hmm. Now for Honey Badger Radio number 66, we have on our special guest, Tom Men Are Good Golden, to discuss how mothers can be good to their sons and raise them with love and support that is good and specifically made for boys.
Boys, right after they're born, I mean, like within 24 hours, they will attend with their eyes to a mobile, while girls will attend to a human face. Now, it's not an all or nothing kind of thing, but generally the boys will tend to mobiles, the girls will tend to the human face. But why? You know, why could that be? Why are there differences in the first day? There's no socialization at all. I mean, why could that be? And the answer is that about 6 months before, 6 or 7 months before, there's this thing that's called a testosterone flood. And, you know, we've known about this testosterone flood since the 1950s, and maybe even before that. But most people have never heard of it before. But what happens is, in utero, when the baby's about 2 months old, you get this flood of testosterone, which then literally changes the brain. And it turns the brain into what researchers are calling the male brain, or the systems brain. You know, the male brain, they found, is interested in systems-oriented sorts of things. And the female brain is more an empathic brain, more interested in relationship kinds of things. Now remember, this is not 100% one and 100% the other. It's not black and white. There's plenty of gray in between. But in general, that's what happens, is this testosterone flood changes the brain of boys into the systems-oriented piece that is very different. We know now there's 4 basic changes that happen with the testosterone flood that the scientists now are sure of. And one is sexual orientation. Our sexual orientation is impacted by this testosterone flood.
Mm.
The next is gender identity. Whether we think we're a boy or a girl is impacted by this testosterone flood. Now that's huge. I mean, both of those are huge. But then the third one is the play behaviors, and the sex-differentiated behaviors in childhood are also impacted by the testosterone flood, and somewhat aggression is impacted. So boys are probably being a little bit more likely to be aggressive. Girls will be less likely to be aggressive. Boys will be more likely to play in big groups and to rough and tumble stuff, and the girls will be more likely to play with an individual. So we know those 4 things are impacted by this testosterone flood, and there's probably more. You know, they're finding out things every day. They've now found out that there's what's called the mini-puberty, which happens within the first 3 months after birth. Little boys get this rush of testosterone, and any parent who's had a little boy knows that, my God, this little guy, he's getting erections. Why is he getting erections, you know? And he's getting erections because he's flooded with testosterone. And they know almost nothing about the impact of that. But they're guessing that this, along with the testosterone flood and some genetic material, they're thinking all these things together are changing boys in a very profound sort of way.
Someone in the chat had, there were a couple of questions. One person asked, is there also an estrogen flood? And I would also want to add that this testosterone flood, it actually does also impact a small number of girls as well as boys.
Yes, and we call those girls tomboys.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and they basically end up with more sort of male brains, sort of.
Exactly. And the interest in these girls that have the extra testosterone tend to be more like the little boys. They want to go out and play rough. They want to climb trees. They don't want to, you know, play with dresses. They want to go out and compete. And it's fascinating, you know, that this stuff is related to our in utero experience. We're born that way. But, you know, as far as the estrogen flood goes, I have no idea. That's a fascinating question. I'd like to know. But I've never heard of it. I think I've probably been more interested in the testosterone side of things and have neglected the estrogen side. We've been told for years that everything is socialization. And so we're all kind of primed in that direction. And they're partly right. I mean, we're not also saying now that it's all testosterone flood. The testosterone flood is a tiny piece of what makes us who we are. And we can combine that with the socialization, with our hormones, with our genetics, and with everything. You put it all together to make a beautiful mix. But it's not one thing, it's everything. You know, we know that hormones impact our socialization. Socialization impacts our genetics. Our genetics impacts both of those. I mean, it's like this thing swirling around. It's just so complex that we probably just have a tiny, tiny piece of what really happens so far. But we know that they all work together, and we don't want to try and look at one as being the biggie and the other one as being, you know, non-existent, like we've been doing for 50 years. You know, where we look at socialization as the only thing. That's bull. when women are given testosterone, their cognitive empathy goes down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an interesting piece, but I think above all of this, the most important factor is fatherlessness.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, without a dad in the home, things fall to crap, you know?
Yeah.
So one of the things that single mothers can do is make sure to have the father involved. If they can't get the father involved, get some loving man involved who cares about the kids. Get a masculine presence in the home as much as you possibly can, because they're going to be able to do things with your son that you can't do.
Each kid has a different personality. You can't have the exact same relationship with all of them. And so you seek a connection based on the child's developing personality, and you seek to guide and bring out the child's strong characteristics and their best characteristics, and you look at where they need help overcoming hurdles and developing their character in a way that's going to make them into a person who's going to have the best time they can have in their life. You know, with society, with work, with whatever career they want to have, with the relationships they want to form, and so on. And that's basically what I did. That's basically what I worked on. And with my son, you know, it was very different than it was with his sisters because his focus on things was very different. His play was very different. And I noticed that he was quicker to pick up on things like my work ethic, things like if I tried making stupid excuses for things that I had no excuse for, he would do the same thing. You know, he took cues from me that I noticed the girls didn't, or they were slower to take from me. And I don't know if it was because he was with me all the time and they weren't, or if it was because boys have a different perception of their mother than their father and girls have that perception of their father versus their mother. But I really had to watch myself and make sure that I showed him the best person I could show him, because he was going to pick up on it very much if I didn't. And I also noticed that it affected what kind of girls he chose to hang out with and how he chose to let them treat him. So I guess that's kind of, you know, that. And I also noticed that he had a lot more fun with me if I engaged the building and creating and puzzle solving into his brain than he did if it was just, you know, just the companionship aspect. It was a lot more fun to hang out together if we were making something or figuring out something, or if we were going to watch something or play a game, it needed to be more cerebral than, you know, tugging on your heartstrings. So that's what I did.
Fatherlessness research is very clear. They've gone beyond the idea of correlation, and they're talking now about causation. They literally are saying they have the data to show that fatherlessness causes some of these things. That's huge. I mean, have you ever heard of a social science research project that has causation involved? No, that's completely unbelievable. So they literally know now that fatherlessness literally causes some of this stuff. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and actually you make a really great point about how, you know, men who end up single fathers are a specific type of man, because to get custody of your kids over the mother, you would have to be an amazing dad.
And you got to have money.
And yes, and you have to come from
and influence.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's a different group, you know, a completely different group.
Yes. So
great group, by the way. You know, I love these guys. I mean, they're doing great work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man.
So it does make it really difficult to compare the two. So it's not because there's something that, you know, is inherent to fathers per se, or inherent to mothers that does the opposite, but rather that there are things that, you know, because of the way that things sort of shake out when you have these child custody disputes, this is going to give us some pretty, like, completely different areas, you know, in terms of numbers and stuff.
You know, the whole storytelling thing is so critical for all children, but boys in particular. Because what happens when think back when you were a little guy and someone said, I'm going to tell you a story. I mean, what's the first thing you do?
Oh, you get comfortable.
Exactly. You get comfortable, you get relaxed. And that means we let our guard down. You know, we're just going to be open to the story. So immediately you're putting your kids and your boys in a position that's receptive and open. And that's a great thing for these little guys. You know, and then you tell them a story. And, oh my gosh, there's so many great stories out there. You know, the Grimm's fairy tales are wonderful to tell kids. You know, they used to use stories, the Grimm's fairy tales, as literally school work. I mean, the stories would teach as they talked. You know, the stories were a part of their education, and we've lost that completely because children love stories. And one of the things I found out with my own kids was that they love stories where they're a part of things. And boys absolutely adore this. You know, you can tell a spontaneous story. You can make something up. You guys were out in the woods one day, and you, Johnny, you found a raccoon's nest, you know, and you just keep going. And Jimmy, you did such, you know, you just keep going and going, and they're just completely enthralled. And then they'll start saying, oh, yeah, and I did this, you know, and you go with that, you go with them, you kind of flow with what they're saying, and they get involved in the story, and it's just a lot of fun, and they really enjoy it, and they don't forget it. You know, it just brings just, it's a wonderful memory for both the kids and the parents to be involved in this. I had the ice cream story, which I used to tell my kids, that they just absolutely loved, and they begged me to tell it over and over again. In fact, they still beg me, and they're in their 20s now, you know, and it was just a very intimate time when you can tell a story. You get really close because you're not judging, you're not saying that they're wrong, you're just kind of being together. And boys like to just be. You know, think about two men in a fishing boat. Women will not understand this, but the guys will. You know, two men in a fishing boat can sit there all frickin' day fishing. They might say something about the bait. They might say something about the local sports team, but they're not going to talk most of the day. They walk away from that experience feeling close.
Mm-hmm.
They feel close to that guy because they shared an experience together. To me, this is a very developed way to be close. In some ways, in my mind, more close than talk, talk, talk. You know, the men are just being together. And that's what we need. You know, that's what we need for our young men, that's what we need for our old men, and we need it for the men in between. You know, a place that's safe, that you can simply be and tell your story and feel admired and respected. Because admiration and respect are the two keys to masculinity. The boys need to be fed respect and admiration. When you admire a young boy, your son, he will start doing anything for you. You know, he will make his bed, he'll do this or that through that admiration, because he's working to get that admiration. You know, very different from the girls, who usually the girls want to be cared for. They want to know that you care about them. They want to know that you're close to them. You know, it's kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different.
I think because men like to take action, they want to take pride in something that they accomplish.
Yes, and I would add on to that plus testosterone. You know, because testosterone, we know now, that testosterone is not about aggression, and it's not about violence. Testosterone is about striving for status. And this is what fuels men and boys. They want to strive for status, and once they get that status, they want to feel like they are respected and admired. But that's a very, very different approach than what we've been talking about when Alan Aldous, you know, said men are testosterone poisoned, you know, which is bullshit. This stuff pushes men to strive to be better and better and better. And they do that. I mean, look at what men competing against each other over the years has built cultures. You know, it's what has built everything. It's what has pushed people to explore, pushed people to create theories. It's this male-to-male competition that's driven by this testosterone, which tells men, strive for status. Try and do this a little bit harder. You see this in boys. You know, the other thing about the testosterone flood is that the testosterone flood does something else that's important. It primes the receptors in the brain to be sensitive to testosterone in the future. So that those people, women and men, who got this testosterone flood, when they get a little bit of testosterone, it's going to have a big impact. If they didn't get the flood, they get the same amount of testosterone, but it's not going to have the same impact. So men are usually sensitized to even small amounts of testosterone. And they're pushed to strive for that status, you know, in their own way. Everybody's got a different way to strive.
You know, my parents were really Catholic, super religious, and they got me this book when I was a kid. It was called The Golden Book of Bible Stories, and essentially they were stories from the Old Testament and some from the New Testament that were essentially written in such a way that a child could understand them. I was probably 10 years old or something when I was reading these books.
Right.
And even those stories, especially the Old Testament ones, I found really interesting. Like, I thought they were, you know, really exciting, like the Greek stuff, like Beowulf, like Treasure Island, and all these other things that followed. You know, Tarzan, the Three Musketeers, I loved all that stuff.
Yes.
Now, in schools today, adventure stories are very hard to come by. There are a lot of storytelling that boys, I think, because I would say that in that regard I was a typical boy. Oh, and besides the sort of the fiction stuff and fairy tales that I'm talking about, I also really liked anything that dealt with dinosaurs and the planets. I thought that was super cool too.
All right.
So, but I don't think that that's abnormal for boys. I think that those are pretty common
Of course,
things.
yeah.
But that stuff's not really as common now. So I think that what that means for me anyway is that storytelling and doing that stuff with your children is even more important, especially, as a mother, but also as a father, because they may not get those stories in academia, in schools.
Yes, that's right.
Because those things are not as, they're more likely to read more sort of emotional stuff is actually what they're putting in schools.
Schools have been feminized.
As a parent, you have to make sure that you abide by the same standards that you're applying to your kid. Because if you act in a way that the boy can see is hypocritical, then he will feel like you don't have any respect for the system.
Yep, that's
because
it.
boys are, they pay a lot of attention to that, right?
They pay a lot of attention to the system.
Yes.
Just watch them play.
Yes.
Boys that play, when they're playing a game with two teams, they do at least 50% of the time, they argue about the rules. The rules and the system are critical. The girls don't have the same kind of dynamic usually. But the boys, that system is just a critical piece. We're going to argue until we get it right. Because they want it fair. The boys want it fair, and they're going to fight about it. And that's a good thing.
Finally, we have a fireside chat with our YouTuber and mother-based mama.
I grew up in the South. I grew up on a farm. You'll never see a more egalitarian lifestyle than growing up on a farm. Everybody pitches in, everybody works. And that's just the way it is, so you can get by. So when we moved off of the farm and started to kind of interact with the wider world, I wasn't a fan. This was, mid-'80s.
What do you mean, like you weren't a fan? A fan of what? The wider world?
Well, coming from having a lot of free time, like to play, and we were in the woods all the time and having adventures, and we read classic literature. We read like Greek myths and adventure stories, and we went out and made our own adventures and played Tarzan in the woods and stuff like that. We moved to suburbia, and everybody was so rigidly scheduled. They had piano lessons, ballet lessons, rec league soccer, t-ball, and it was just, they were never around to play. There was never any imaginative, unstructured playtime. And even as a little kid, I didn't like that. I didn't like that I would approach my peers and they couldn't play with me because they didn't really understand this concept of just imagining a thing to be. Yeah. And you can play pirate ship with them because they were just, well, we don't have a ship, we don't have swords, there's sticks right there, what's the problem? And it was confusing to me. Go ahead.
I grew up rural as well, and I completely understand where you're coming from. There's a certain freedom that comes with that, and it's because once the work is done, it's do something productive, don't die, and I'll see you for supper. So
pretty much. I mean, we had to be threatened with our lives to come in to eat. And nowadays you have to be threatened with your life to get outside. So it's very inverted, and my approach to raising my kids is to provide as much free space as I can. To just let them imagine or give them kind of a seed of where are we going to go with this, and just let them develop and do what they want to do and be who they're going to be. This kid spent most of his days at daycare, so it's very structured. Then he was home with his mom. That was very structured because she had limited time, so everything was on a very rigid routine. So he's at school. Everybody's everywhere. He is supposed to carry this packet with him. He doesn't know what's in it. He doesn't know why he has to carry it. It's all very confusing because they don't really tell kids what's going on. They just sort of say, do this, do that, and then the kids are expected to respond, with abject obedience, and that's very difficult for little children to do because they're naturally curious. They want to know why they're doing a thing. And this poor kid was just having the worst time of it, and he started to cry. So my son went and he hugged him, and he's like, it's okay. We're all doing this together. It seems a little scary, but I'll be here with you, and we can be brave together. We can work. We can be a team together. And then I got a note home that day talking about a hands-off policy and how we don't hug our friends at school. And I was infuriated. It's not like he walked up and punched a kid in his head. he hugged him to comfort him, to make him feel safe about this new experience that he was kind of suddenly being thrown into without a lot of preparation or explanation. And I went and talked to the principal, and she was just kind of like, well, that's our policy, that's what we do. And you're like, well, that's stupid. Because kids need to be comforted, and they need their peers to say, I'm in this with you, and we can do this together. You know, we're all in this together, we'll work together, and we'll do this as a team.
Yeah, let's crack down on your son for showing empathy, shall we? Like, what?
Well, they couldn't do anything. Like, if one of the students failed, they weren't allowed to help them up. You know, it was stupid stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was this no touching policy, and I thought, this has just gone too far. So I found a small school where they don't have a stupid no touching policy. It's a charter school. They've always had a really good way of taking it, you know, kind of case by case and dealing with the situation as it arises, because we had moved, and that's how I found the school. But before that, my son and two of his friends were watching a kindergartner get bullied by fifth graders on the playground, and they weren't going to have it. So then two of his friends went after these kids and beat them up, and they all got suspended. And I was like, why? I mean, he's defending a smaller child. He's being actively abused by larger kids, and the teachers aren't doing anything because they're so restricted in their discipline that they can't even interfere and discipline these kids. So you have this like zero tolerance bullying policy, and then you also handcuff the teachers and administrators so they can't do anything about it anyway. So you have an ineffectual system where nothing can be done. You know, you just kind of have to let it be. And that's, my son, bless his heart, in third grade going, I'm sorry, I'm going to swear. That's bullshit, Mom. And I'm like, it is, you're right, and I agree. And so I got the letter home, and I called his father, and I was like, he got suspended for fighting. Here's the situation as he described it to me. And I called his teacher, and she basically was right in line with his story. Like, she was kind of frustrated by the inability to stop these kids from harassing other kids. I mean, you can kind of tell when there's an injustice happening here, and the rules say you can't stop it, and how frustrated she was by it. And she was honestly very proud of him for standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to tolerate this, and we as a group, me and my two friends here, are going to stop you. And they got whipped. Don't get me wrong, they got beat up. But it didn't matter to him because he didn't care if he got his butt kicked. He didn't care if he got suspended. He cared about doing the right thing and being honorable and just. And that's something that I feel like when you handicap teachers from being able to mediate these situations, and you handicap the administration from being able to be adaptable to the situation, you eliminate justice. When my parents got divorced, they really needed to. My father was a child molester. He was, mentally very, very, very messed up. That split needed to occur. It needed to occur. It wasn't, she didn't take any joy in it. She wasn't happy about it. She wasn't running all over the place partying and things like that. She really, it was hard for her to make that decision. And I understood that. Even being 10 years old, I understood that. When this is one of the things that I wanted to fix. I wanted to get involved so I could fix it. We went to the Women and Children's Resource Center, and my brother was about 15, and he had been molested too. My father was indiscriminate about it. And we had just tons of books, and there was there's a course, like cycle course that you go through to end up, healed or whatever. And there's really nothing for boys. He was basically told to kind of suck it up and walk it off.
Yeah.
And that really pissed me off because he was, in puberty, didn't really understand how he related as a male to other males, didn't understand how he should relate to females as a male. He was very, I'm going to get a lot of hate for it, but I'm going to tell you, I think that sexual abuse for boys is more psychologically damaging than it is for girls. And I think the reason it is not because the action itself is more psychologically damaging, but the absolute lack of resources and willingness to help them afterwards.
The response is
Yes.
significantly it's
Girls
like
get
it's
coddled.
muted.
Are you-
like-
Are
by
you
comparison.
sure that's what happened? Are you sure? Are you
Yeah.
sure it went that way?
I don't know.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
is pretty hot.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any from
Kinda-
me on this.
You get kind of blown off and really kind of ignored. Like, you should just suck it up and walk it off, and that's part of being a man, is just getting over it. And you can't approach it that way. And they were working out of an old PTSD shell shock manual from Vietnam, trying
Oh
to
my
deal
God.
with him, because that's what they had. It wasn't that they didn't want to help; it's that they couldn't. So
For the
my
resources
mother. Well, my mom was a second wave feminist, and God bless her, she tried to hold on through this third wave stuff, and she's just like, you know, it's not working for me. You guys are crazy. So she just was like, yeah, this is just a bunch of whining bitches at this point.
Bridge too far. Bridge too far.
There are a good number of single mothers that don't understand male nature. They don't understand masculinity. They don't understand boys at all, and or they work really hard to make sure that there are no fathers in that boy's life. So
Oh,
he
and then
goes
they do
to
this shit where they're like, you're just like your father.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's such
Oh,
a terrible thing. Well, you know what, honey? You fucked him,
Yeah.
so there must have been something good about him.
Yeah.
Like, I
And-
hate that. Oh, God, that gets under my skin.
Yeah.
I've been up in mom's faces for that. I will.
and
Like,
then
hey,
the-
you know, you liked him enough to have a kid with him, so it couldn't have been that bad.
and
Because
those
you're
boys.
telling that boy that he's bad by his very nature, by the fact
Sure.
that he exists, that he's a bad thing. Why would you do that to your own child?
Yep.
That's
and those
horrible.
and those boys grow up. Think about this too. They grow up with a hole of affection and understanding that they never could get, either because the persons that were closest to them just didn't understand them, or didn't have an interest in them, or maybe they resent them. Because, you know, I knew a girl, and I know this is common. I knew a girl who became a single mother who grew to resent her son because the father of her child committed suicide before he was born. And the reason why was because he was mentally ill, like he was suicidal. And she thought if she had his baby, he would find a reason to live. And it actually made it
Oh,
worse
no.
because the pressure to essentially become a father to that child, he couldn't handle. And then she took an interest in somebody else and started dating another guy while she was still because she was basically like, well, I can't take this guy's, you know, problems anymore, so I'm going to start dating someone else. And then she told him, I'm seeing somebody else now, and I'm still carrying your baby. And so that guy killed himself. And then she has the child, and, you know, she resents the child. It's like, I made a mistake. Why did I keep this baby? I can't stand looking at him. He reminds me of all of the stupid mistakes that I made, you know?
Well, that's
And,
a her problem, and she needs to deal with that. Mothers and babies exchange stem cells during pregnancy, and we exchange hormones. So you can actually feel your child's emotional state in utero. So you can tell when they're frustrated, and you can tell when they're curious, and your body physically responds to them being stimulated and curious. This baby, I don't want to say his name because he's named after family, and it's a surprise. I wanted to call him that, but he knows his name, I can tell you that. But if you get a flashlight, even as early as 3.5, 4 months, you get a flashlight and put it on one side, and the baby will move to the flashlight. They'll go and find the light. You talk to them, and they'll move from one side to the other, trying to locate that noise, trying to find that sound. And the way I describe it to my kids is like, you've been walking around your whole life, you know, free and moving with the gravity that you know, and then you're born, and all of a sudden you're trying to exist inside the gravitron. Everything is very heavy and confusing and loud and bright. I don't know if you guys have ever been on that ride. It's like flashing lights, loud music, and you're like, everything is 1,000 pounds. Your head weighs a ton, your arms weigh a ton. And that's what it's like coming from this little bubble of happiness and warmth that you've been comfortable in out into the world now, where it's like, oh crap, I have to figure out how my body works again. And so they're actually very adept at movement, and their motor skills are I wouldn't say fine-tuned motor skills, but they know their bodies when they're in this environment. So they're adapting to being born is trying to, like I said, it's like trying to now live in the gravitron. It's very loud, very, very bright, and your body is just so heavy you can hardly move it around. One of the things that with single fathers, you have less sexual activity in female children. With males, it is kind of roughly the same. It's actually a little bit less. I just read a paper on it. I don't know where I put it. I'm sorry. But it was men and women, they think differently, which they should. You know, their genetics are completely different. Women tend to be geared toward immediate need, and men tend towards a broad spectrum. Sorry, I'm fumbling on my words. They tend to see the bigger picture and to plan accordingly with goals further out. So they have a greater capacity for delayed gratification in achieving goals, whether that's personal goals, familial goals, whatever. Women, because we're geared more toward the immediate need, that's difficult for us to do. It's not impossible, but it's difficult for us to do that, to have that long-term view. And I mean, men and women do need each other. We balance each other in these ways because we do think differently and we take different approaches. But when you're dealing with kids, when you have a father who's dominant in the home, you have kids who they understand the concept of working toward a goal and delaying gratification in favor of the ultimate goal. Whereas with children who are raised by single mothers, they tend to lack that thinking and that understanding of having something in the future as opposed to getting it as quickly and expeditiously as possible now. They understand the process of working towards that, and they understand better the concepts of sacrifice, of honor, of stoicism, and these are things that aren't common in women just because of our different ways of thinking. It's not. I would think that saying that 10 to 20% have inverted brains is way overestimating, wildly. According to every study and going all the way.
So as a refresher, in Tom Golden's book, he says about 17% of boys in utero, when the testosterone flood is supposed to hit, they end up with a more female brain. All right, so using the term female brain somewhat loosely in the same way that we would use the term male brain somewhat loosely, because there is a lot of overlap, but there are definite differences between the two. And the same number of the same percentage of girls, according to Tom Golden's book, experience the same thing, and that's how you get what we call tomboys, which are girls that tend to do more boyish activities and have more of an interest in the kinds of things that boys do. They like to play in groups. They like to do team sports. They like to climb trees. They're more. They take more risks, whatever it is. And you're saying, yeah, and what you're saying is that 17% number is it seems too big, too exploded, too
it seems very, very, very high. I would say half of that.
Yeah.
But it's also not taking into account the neuroplasticity of the brain, particularly in children.
You learn more from your kids by asking them questions than you do by telling them things, And kids are smart, and I think the number one mistake we are doing right now, right from pre-K all the way to me here in university, is we're treating kids like they're fucking idiots, and then they're becoming fucking idiots.
Well, if you come to educating children, either in the home or at school or whatever, from the perspective of they need to parrot what I have said, you're already screwing them up. Because they're not learning anything. My advice on parenting boys, it's very simple. Let them do what they do.
Morale.
Don't overparent them until they're hurt. And then they will come to you. Boys will come to you when they have a problem.
Yeah.
You don't need to hover.
And you don't need to beat them when they screw something up. One thing I've noticed just quickly before we go, between boy and girl children, when boys screw up, it's like their universe has ended and they have let everyone down. And I have watched this happen, and depression rates in boys are so much higher. And of course, suicide rates are higher. And I think that's part of it. Because when there's a failure, even if it's a small failure, it's just the end of the fucking world to them. And you can't mock that because it is quite real in that moment. You have to go, no, you're not a failure. It's okay. Keep trying.
Yeah,
and that is a skill, I think, that has been, try again. Master Wayne, why do we fall? But people aren't saying that. I had to get a Batman reference in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But that's not being said anymore. It's, well, you just screwed up. So what are you going to do now? Are you a screw up because you're a man? Are you a screw up because you're a boy? How could you do that? And I don't think we're giving boys the kind of support they need, which is not to commiserate and say, oh, poor baby. It's to say, it's not a big deal. Get up. You're okay. You didn't let everyone down.
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows that you think we should have shown, please leave a comment on the video and include a timestamp. Thank you, and Badger on.